I've been turning into the comparison guy, and yet I haven't really bothered myself to try Sentinel versus MAFEX. And finally, I have the excuse to do so with Into the Spider-Verse Miles Morales. And it took a while, not only because of time and because other things were coming out that took priority, hot releases, yada yada, but at the same time, Sentinel is very niche down when it comes to this very prosumer tier of collecting. By prosumer, I mean that kind of demographic where we're not talking as expensive and high caliber as Hot Toys, Mondo, hell, even InArt at this point. But also, we're not talking about just generic consumer figures that you can just kind of walk into a Target or a Walmart and pick up, like Marvel Legends, McFarlane Toys, hell, even NECA. No, we're talking about the guys that are kind of in the middle, where we have, I think, the trifecta, in my opinion: MAFEX, Medicom MAFEX, SH Figure Arts, and also SV Action Sentinel, or it's Sentinel for short, as I like to call them. And since I do manage to have the MAFEX Into the Spider-Verse Miles Morales, I figured, you know what, let's break it down to exactly what it is that stands out as very key differences to make the argument for one another. And as such, this is going to be strictly a comparison, not so much a review of each individual figure. So I'm not going to break down every single little detail, joint, articulation, accessory, etc. I'm just going to cover as much broad strokes as possible as far as the things that really stood out to me. Plus, I technically already reviewed the MAFEX Into the Spider-Verse Miles Morales in his own separate video. Granted, this is back in the day where I didn't really have this whole setup with the camera, the lights, the light box, etc. But at the same time, I also kind of want to meet these figures in the middle, where it's not a full-blown review. We're going to be here all day, but at the same time, break down the specifics as to why it is that we really do need to pay a little bit more attention to Sentinel, even if Sentinel themselves are not paying attention to themselves outside of this wave. So let's talk Miles Morales himself. As you can see, both figures are right here. They're technically to scale to fit for the remainder of the wave, except you really are dealing for the majority of the team, if not the whole team, when it comes to Sentinel. Whereas MAFEX, and I'll bring this back around a little bit later, MAFEX has really only done Miles and Gwen. They really haven't done anybody else as far as I can tell. Actually, I take it back. I believe they did do Peter. They did do a Peter B. Parker, but that's it. Whereas Sentinel has done the entire wave, and because they've done the other characters, they needed to match Miles appropriately as far as scaling, and as a result, you're dealing with pretty much a scaling and proportion that is kind of one-to-one to one another. And I say kind of, because if you look a little closer, you'll notice that the Sentinel is just a tinge higher. I really want to say about a millimeter, maybe even a fraction of a millimeter higher and taller, as well as all the respective dimensions of the proportions being kind of following suit. So he's going to have a little bit of a girthier physique, but he's still leaning towards that lean, pre-adolescent look that Miles Morales had in Into the Spider-Verse. And because of that, they're very respective to one another. So to the naked eye, they might look a little similar, but once you kind of get into the little details as far as the scaling and the proportioning, you'll notice that Sentinel is just a little bit beefed up. For the most part, though, the proportions are still very top-notch as far as the Sentinel is concerned, specifically the way that the head is sculpted, the chest, and also the paint decals. Even though this could kind of lean a little bit more towards the subjective side, I feel like they're a little bit better on the Sentinel. He's got that smoky black that looks like it was just, added via spray paint to an existing Spider-Man suit. Granted, it looks a little too clean around the shoulder area with the red, but that spider symbol on both the front and the back, as well as the web linings, that grayed out web linings, stand out and are very predominant throughout the figure. And to me, I feel like they clash a little bit better with the black. And they just have a better, firmer quality to the paint apps and the sculpting that's going on with the texturing there. Better than that of the MAFEX. Whereas the MAFEX technically does have the web sculpted into the plastic itself. And that is pretty respective. But it's not really painted all that well. You do have a little bit of silver lining happening alongside the webbing. But it kind of gets a little lost when it comes to the chest area that you can see right there. It's a little bit on the much more anemic side. He definitely has the slimmer build, and granted, some may argue that that's a little bit more accurate to the way that he looked like in that movie, and that kind of goes a little extra fold when it comes to the head. It's looking a little bulbous for my liking, but at least this leans to a much more faithful representation, even though subjectively I like the Sentinel better. But the only area that I do think that proportion-wise MAFEX was able to get a little more accurate were going to be those legs and thighs, specifically the thighs. You'll notice that they're a little bit more to scale with the rest of the body, whereas Sentinels, it's a little bit too beefy. I would personally have reduced that a little bit more. And though I was praising the slightly more spray painted look of the red around the shoulders for the MAFEX, it's also a little inconsistent. You'll notice that it's a bit more muted on the inside part of the torso where the symbol, and even you have a few of those like kind of fang looking gashes on the sides that kind of then connect and bleed to the shoulder red. And even though I like the red that's on his fingers, because like I said, it kind of looks like it's fading into the black of the rest of the suit, the red is a little inconsistent when it comes to the shoulder area. It's a little too bright for my liking, whereas over here, it kind of lends a little bit more to that smoky overall look of the rest of the suit that I just personally like just a little bit better. Now, that's not to say that both figures don't feel too bad in hand. Granted, they're a little bit on the frigid side because of the physique, and I do feel like the MAFEX has this much more delicate feel to him that just feels like it's very, very easy to break, but that's only because of how much more slightly accurate the physique really is to that leaner kind of kid look that he's kind of going for into the Spider-Verse before he started to yoke up a little bit for Across the Spider-Verse. So even though this is the more accurate representation, again, every time I pick him up, I feel like something's going to bend or warp in a very easy way because that's just the nature of the beast. Whereas Sentinel, the plastic to me just feels a little bit more filled up, a little firmer, a little bit more adequate in quality, despite, like I said, the girthiness of the thighs that really protrude when you look at him from the side profile. At least the actual quality of the plastic feels really good in hand, and it feels just as good to pose. The articulation, again, I'm not going to break down every single joint because I've already reviewed this guy. And for the most part, I feel like the articulation is almost the same on the Sentinel. There was very, very little that I can really point out. Maybe the actual methods or the physicality of the joints might be a little bit different, but overall, the end result of bending said joint is going to be about the same. Like you have the two joints at the elbows, the two at the knees, the top of the leg, the waist, the mid-torso. In fact, if you look a little closer, you'll notice that the mid-torso almost looks kind of identical to that of the Sentinel, just made out of a different form of blueprint for dimensions, for quality, etc. But the actual, like, break in the mid-torso is about the same. I feel like the only area that Sentinel is a little different than that of the MAFEX as far as articulation, and in my opinion, it's kind of for the better, is the shoulders. They did like this method when it came to the shoulder joint that feels like it's cupping the joint on the inside, that results in not only being able to rotate it 300, let me put him down because he's easily going to fall because of, again, how frail he kind of feels, but you're able to move the arms almost all the way up and actually can turn the full 360 if you kind of nudge them a little off to the side, full 360 vertical rotation, full extension, and you still have a little bit of butterfly movement. Granted, if you extend it off to the sides, you get even better movement and better degrees of mobility going forward and backwards, as you see before you right there. And yet the way that they were able to sculpt it in this, like I said, cupping mechanism to the actual ball joint inside, it just kind of retains this illusion without having to separate too many pieces. And to me, I'm like, yo, Sentinel may have figured out the code when it came to these shoulder joints, whereas MAFEX goes a little bit more traditional by having the ball joint kind of exposed here on the side that still allows it to rotate vertically 360 and the hinge inside of that ball joint being able to extend off to the sides. But when it comes to Butterfly, you have that washer piece that is kind of covering this entire dumbbell joint, and that allows the movement forward and backwards. But as such, it also kind of, I guess you could say, kind of uglifies the entirety of this area right here. It just looks a little bit weird compared to that of the MAFEX. Initially, I was like, all right, well, that's just standard action figure fare. But when I saw the way that a Sentinel was able to treat it and still not compromise on the mobility, that's where I was like, okay, never mind, MAFEX. Now you don't have any excuse. You see the way that Sentinel did it right here? Just copy their homework, because this is really the way to go. Now, frankly, though, that kind of makes up for some loss in articulation, because even though, like I said, the majority of the joints are pretty much one-to-one with that of the MAFEX, you still got the toesies, the ball ankle joints, like I mentioned before, the knees, the elbows, even the two joints at the top and bottom of the neck that allow the head and, again, like I mentioned before, the waist and torso articulation. MAFEX does have, however, one beat on the Sentinel. That's going to be the wrists. Though the wrist can still rotate on the Sentinel horizontally, there is no movement inwards and outwards. There's an actual ball joint hinge on the inside of the ball joint for the MAFEX that allows the hand to move inwards and outwards, as well as being able to rotate all the way around. However, the Sentinel completely does not have that. It only allows rotation. There's no bending of any kind because inside is the rod that is completely frozen. It's completely permanent, and I fear that obviously I was able to stop myself, but even when I tried to kind of bend the hand, I had to stop myself when I felt that first feeling of resistance. I was like, wait, hold up. And that could lead to some others breaking in the possibility that maybe they don't know that. They go in for the bend and then poof, there goes the wrist joint. So take that into consideration if you were considering getting the Sentinel Miles. I'm trying to remember if Peter B. Parker or even the Penny Robot had that case, but yeah, Miles was dealt with some rather stagnant wrist joints, and that's a little bit of a shame considering how well they were doing throughout the entirety of their articulation for Sentinel. That, in my opinion, is certifiably the winner, minus, again, the wrists, which would have gone a long way to kind of distract us from the rather oversized hands now that I look at it. That's probably the only other weird proportioning mishap that Sentinel does have. It has to be the slightly elongated forearms and hands that look a little weird. But hey, if it means that the elongated hands means a tighter neck, I would gladly take it because the neck on the MAFEX came on mine rather loose. And that was straight out of the box, and I bought mine brand new. Not secondhand, nothing like that. It was brand new. So this could have been handled way better. Look at this. Look at this. Yeah, this is kind of unacceptable. On top of that, the head is sculpted, like I mentioned before, very bulbous. I frankly do not appreciate that. So there's a bit of a better workload happening with the articulation, the posability on the Sentinel, and you can only do so much when you then pair it with what I like to call the swappables. This is the swappables portion of the overall comparison, which is where we're dealing with the extra accessories, however, the ones specifically designed to amplify the poses, the amplified articulation, and help out the look of the figure overall. Predominantly the hands and the feet, which both come with, as far as quantities are concerned, the general amount that you'd expect any Spider-Man figure, Miles Morales, Miguel O'Hara, Peter Parker, etc., any kind of figure you get of a Spidey character, they pretty much come both with those general hands that you'd expect. You, of course, have the neutral open hands, the fist hands, the web holding hands with the hole cut out, the extended wall crawling hands, and then, of course, web shooting hands. Ever so often, you're going to have the outlier to kind of specify to certain companies, like a specific holding hand for the MAFEX in which he can hold the loose mask that is supposed to be like a sculpted out piece so they can hold it in his hand when he's not wearing the mask. And then when it comes to Sentinel, they decided to do something a little unorthodox. His web shooting hands are actually attached to the two web strands he comes with, at least the short bulbous ones, to make it look like he's mid-shoot, which I guess kind of favors the illusion and makes it easier to track and not lose either of them, but at the same time, would have liked the ability to be able to kind of unplug them. You know, they're actually not removable. You can't really remove them off. They're permanently stuck to the web shooting hands. So that could very well be a make or break for a lot of collectors, and I don't necessarily blame them. I don't feel as bothered as much, but I can completely understand if this does in fact perturb certain collectors from collecting them, whereas the web shooting hands on the MAFEX are loose and the web strands themselves are separate. Now granted, most of these web strands for the MAFEX are very, very generic. They're a solid white, they're a little warpy, they're a little dangly, they're a little cheap feeling, but they get the job done as far as creating that illusion. And of course, some of the shorter ones are going to come with the little hoops so that when you swap out the hands, you're able to fit in along the wrist joint and be able to create that illusion. Whereas Sentinel only comes with one extra web strand, and it's technically the L-shaped one designed to go into his holding hands with the hole cut out of them. And the web strand itself, though, is really high quality. In fact, the web strand, as well as the two web shots that are connected to his web shooting hands, are made out of this really solid white plastic with great detailing, and it feels actually kind of weighty in hand. When you feel this plastic, it's actually very difficult to break or bend. It's very, very solid, very firm, very quality, but that's kind of it. I would have liked it if Sentinel would have played a little bit better with the web pieces, because after a little while, the ones that come with MAFEX or ACH Figure Arts, they become a little generic. It's like a been there, done that kind of scenario. Whereas the ones with Sentinel, I feel like if you're dealing with this form of quality, this form of like that opaque kind of look to the actual translucentness of the plastic, as well as the detailing on the strands themselves, I would have dug it if maybe they got a little creative and gave us like a coiling one, or one that's kind of like mid-action, mid-animation shooting, kind of like the ones that Hot Toys started to include with their recent Advanced Suit 2.0 Spideys and those kind of, web strands, where they started to change it up. They started to kind of deviate away from the generic ones that they kept repackaging with Spidey figures, and they started to include brand new ones we'd never seen before. Would have liked it if Sentinel would have tapped into that area as far as accessories is concerned. Outside of web strand gate, the actual hands themselves, it's kind of a trade-off depending on which way you look at it. With the Sentinel, you have much better quality, much better feeling to swapping them out. And again, the paint apps that you kind of get off of the base figure itself are replicated with the hands themselves. But like I mentioned before, you have not only a little bit of disproportioning when it comes to the sizing of the hands, but also no hinges. Once you pop them in, you can only rotate them. You can't really bend them inwards and outwards. So that problem it keeps on going. Whereas with MAFEX, not only do you have the rod that you simply just slide them in and out, but you still got the same articulation. They are still technically consistent with the paint apps, but they do feel a little bit more on the delicate side. More than 2 or 3 times, I've had a little bit of a scare where I lost a hand because of how frail and delicate they are, and I'm looking everywhere until it's finally right under my nose and I was able to find it across. Now, however, MAFEX does include the magnetized open wall crawling hands and magnetized shoes that you can also swap out for the suited shoes he has on person, whereas Sentinel decided to not include that whatsoever. They didn't go for any of the magnetized gimmicks, which is... it points for trying on MAFEX's part to include it, but like I mentioned before in various other MAFEX reviews, the magnets they include, never really the strongest, even with when your figure is as frail and as light and as thin and as agile as Into the Spider-Verse Miles Morales here. They still haven't quite nailed it. So much like with any other Spidey figure, the only thing left to swap out will be the heads. Both come with alternate heads, both for the masked and unmasked versions of Miles Morales. When it comes to the masked, however, Sentinel has a beat because MAFEX decided to go with this much more, I guess you could say, more leering looking expression to his face that's barely any different than the one that he has by default. You can notice right there that side to side, yeah, you'll notice that the lenses are a little bit more squinted, but it doesn't really make that big of a difference, if I'm being quite honest. It's kind of like whatever. Yeah, he looks a little meaner, he looks a little bit more focused, but it's not a big enough difference for me to go through the effort of swapping out the heads. Whereas with Sentinel, they decided to go with a completely different expression, much more of a winky face, where you have one squinted, one open, which is either him winking or him trying once again to make Uncle Aaron proud with the famous, hey, shoulder touch. So you can definitely replicate that scene with that head sculpt right there, and it's pretty cool that they went a little more animated when it comes to that expression. Similar case with the alternate unmasked Miles Morales head sculpt, except on the subjective side, I like the actual animated look of the facial expression. I love the sculpting and the paintwork much better than that of the MAFEXs, because the MAFEX has this much more determined look. And even though both have great paintwork when it comes to replicating the Miles Morales from the movie, I feel like the more accurate one is the Sentinel, even though I like the much more straightforward expression on the MAFEX. So you see, I'm kind of ping-ponging a little bit here because I like the expression on the MAFEX, but I like the actual accuracy to his much more juvenile look on the Sentinel and the skin tone. I feel like the skin tone is much more accurate on the Sentinel here than that of the MAFEX. I know some of you are going to the comics and be like, he said what? But come on, look at them next to each other. The skin tone is much more accurate and, quite frankly, favorable on that of the Sentinel than it is on the MAFEX. MAFEX decided to go for this much more ashier, smokier look to his skin tone, and I know for a fact he did not look like that in the movie. Again, I do like the expression better. I wish that there was a way to kind of blend these two together to get the skin tone and the actual quality of the overall representation on this guy, but with the expression of this guy. Granted, this guy's probably got the better hairstyle in my opinion. As far as the hairline, it looks a little bit more complementary to the character. And again, it kind of favors the age group that he had in Into Spider-Verse as opposed to Across the Spider-Verse. It's just that the side eye, to me, just kind of limits a little bit of the possibility I can do with this unmasked head sculpt because he's only going to be looking in one direction. A criticism that I've even expanded on over to McFarlane whenever they do the side eye or the looking off a little off to the left or off to the right, because his reasoning for that is to make the figure feel like it's come alive, but at the same time I'm like, yeah, but there's only so many poses I can really do, whereas with this guy, he's looking straight forward. It kind of favors more availability to those poses. And if that one wasn't enough, he technically does come with a third head sculpt that is half mask. So he has the mask kind of pulled up a little bit with it. Once again, a much more stern, determined look on his face that I do like the expression of, but still lacks a little bit as far as that color accuracy is concerned. So I'm still going to have to give this one over to Sentinel despite the quantities of extra heads for the MAFEX. So this brings us to the nitty gritty, what I like to call the value proposition, because once you start to get into this price point with MAFEX, where you're dealing with somewhere between, what, 80, 90, maybe even $100, Sentinel, I know, likes to push it probably to like 110, 120, depending on the figure. I believe this guy went for a good 80 or 90 as well, but once you get into like the taller figures like Sentinel Peter B. Parker, specifically the deluxe edition that comes with the gargoyle, the Spider-Man Noir, Benjamin Parker, the Nicolas Cage character, he's going for like a flat 100. I believe, I'm sorry, not Penny. Actually, Penny, I think, did go for like 110. And then for 130, you get Gwen packed with Spider-Ham because those are two characters. So what is the value proposition you're dealing with Miles here? With MAFEX, it really, actually with both characters, you're dealing with an alternate outfit because this wasn't the only outfit that is very iconic for Miles to have worn in Into the Spider-Verse. It was also what I like to call the tagger outfit, or rather the shorts and jacket he wears very early on in the film. And he kind of slightly wears when he first puts on the suit and takes his leap of faith. And with MAFEX, they decided to do felt goods for the outfit itself. You're dealing with actual cloth, wool, stitching, and even a little bit of wiring to kind of favor posability, I guess you could say, for like the hood piece, a little bit around the cuffs of the jacket, and then, of course, the waist piece, and even a little bit of Velcro to help out with the positioning of the shorts. So they decided to go for actual felt clothing on the outfit itself. You have the hoodie here with the red kind of aqua, blue-green kind of color scheming along with a little bit of black, and then the gray for the shorts right there. And so this coupled with, of course, the sneakers, which come with its own pair of magnetized versions of the sneakers, you pretty much just have to do a little bit of tailoring and finagling to put this on the character. So all you have to do is just swap out the shoes, or rather take off the shoes and the hands to then slide everything onto the figure, almost as if you're clothing an actual person or like a baby or like a child. You pretty much have to do a lot of that role-playing, so to speak, to the character, to the figure, to then put on the outfit and actually make it look like he's wearing the tagger outfit. And in doing so, it kind of favors a little bit of the articulation and the mobility because you're dealing with clothing that can actually bend with the character, with the figure. So therefore, it may limit certain joints depending on the stitching, but I gotta be honest, this definitely trumps what the method, or rather the approach, that Sentinel decided to opt in with, because they decided to go with plastic. Literally every part of the alternate outfit, the tagger outfit, is made out of plastic pieces. And you can see right here that even the shoulders kind of have their own like guard or their own piece to kind of assemble it and make sure that you don't lose it. So you have the sleeves right here as well as the mid jacket piece, and even a separate piece for the shorts, complete with its own rig, I guess you could say, of the waist and thigh pieces with their own set of articulation built into them, which is kind of cool because it's like, all right, yeah, we're going for a much more rigid plastic approach, but at least we're still going to bake in the joints of articulation that you would find on the figure itself into even not only the short pieces, but also the sleeve pieces. They both come with joints on the elbows that are fully able to bend all the way, and of course that cupping mechanism to the shoulder pieces that I was really praising on the base figure itself are replicated once again on the jacket pieces. So once you pop them in, you're still going to be dealing with the same articulation, being able to rotate, butterfly movement, extension, you name it, all that jazz. So it's cool that they still kept that in mind. And even though the process of swapping all of this stuff onto the figure itself is not only very intuitive and very easy to do and straightforward, but it also kind of scratched a little bit of my Transformer itch, where I love Transformer figures because I love that it's pretty much not only a robot and a vehicle, but it's also a puzzle machine. It's also a puzzle piece, a little bit of a Rubik's Cube, where part of the enjoyment for me is being able to transform the figures back and forth, the actual process of it all, figuring it out. And so trying to figure out how to transform this standard suit of Sentinel Miles to then the Tagger outfit, even though it comes with a really well illustrated manual that I like to actually kind of browse through, I opted to try to do it on my own, and I was still able to nail it. And not only that, but like I said, it was very fun to swap them in and out, but the rigidness of the plastic still kind of holds back on certain poses that the MAFEX was still able to lend to because of the way that they went for the much more premium feeling cloth. Because even though the stitching could have been a little bit better, you're still dealing with felt goods, and those things don't come cheap, whereas over here, it's just replicated PVC plastic. Especially when you're dealing with this mid-jacket torso piece. This thing is actually not that great. I know that they were probably opting in to go for this aerodynamic look to kind of replicate the scene where he's taking the leap of faith, but I gotta be honest, this thing is a nuisance because once you prop it onto the figure, you swap the arms in, and you try to, again, complete the image, there's something about the jacket piece that just feels kind of off, that it never really flushes with the body, and the holes never line up to that of the shoulders. Furthermore, it kind of not only limits a little bit of the mid-torso articulation, but these sticks, or rather these yarn pieces that are technically articulated via a ball joint here at the top, they come off super, super easy, very easy to lose, very annoying. But then you see right here that his hoodie is actually separated from the jacket, and that's because he comes with two pieces. One is meant to be a pulled-up jacket piece, a pulled-up hoodie piece, and then the other one is supposed to be his hoodie pulled down. And both of them are terrible to put on the jacket. They have this little tab on the bottom part to fit into the slot that's on the back of the jacket, but they never fit in place. And even when they do, they come out super easily. More often than not, the hoodie piece would just come off, and I would just leave it off because it's a nuisance. It never flushes with the neck, never fits on the head. There's some that fit some heads better than others. Overall, the hoodie pieces are, the pulled up one can only fit the masked head, and then the pulled down one can only fit the unmasked head because of the hair. But I'm sorry, part of me kind of wishes I could alternate, but it looks like they're kind of stuck to one another. So those are really the options that you're dealing with here, and for a fact, it's an option that I wouldn't have to deal with if I was dealing with felt goods over here with MAFEX. Sentinel would also try even further by completing the illusion with this spray canned hand that is similar to that of the web shooting hands, where you have the spray can attached permanently to the spray gesturing hand right here. And it does a good job of, again, selling that illusion to make it look like he's tagging already, specifically with the unmasked head, because it's actually it's for the right hand, so it favors the expression on his face of him looking off to the right. So props for trying with this extra included hand to fit into his outfit. But the outfit's rigidness on the torso piece, combined with the fact that I believe the color scheme on the overall outfit is a bit more muted and technically a little inaccurate to that of the felt goods on the MAFEX, I'm going to have to give the win on over to them. Which they kind of needed, because that's really about it for MAFEX. Outside of the translucent plastic base that MAFEX always tosses in, this is really about it for everything that is included in the box for MAFEX Into the Spider-Verse Miles Morales, whereas Sentinel actually kind of kept it going. Not only do they come with their robust, solid black base that is also articulated, and you kind of slide the arm across the board when you remove the little plastic piece inside of the base itself, but also they threw in a few extra pieces here to kind of sweeten the deal, some of which are a little strange, specifically with some of the rigidness that I was already kind of criticizing a little bit. He comes with these extra untied shoelace pieces that you can actually swap out for the ones that I've actually went ahead and put on the sneaker shoes already. They come off separate, but basically the sneakers actually have a hole on them, and you can dress them up with either tied up shoelaces or these untied shoelaces that are technically there for any kind of airborne or aerodynamic poses that you want to put him up on. Because trust me, if you try to put these on while he's kind of flat on the surface, they're going to pop off because they don't make sense. They kind of come into contact with the floor, and it's not going to work really. So the option is there, but again, this kind of goes back to what I was criticizing about the overall outfit. They went for plastic approaches to these things that probably would have been better with either yarn, string, or felt goods. He also comes with a phone accessory that actually has his little graffiti screensaver actually etched into it with a little answer or deny kind of graphic on there, so that's a pretty nice little touch. And also a set of headphones that again are made out of this rigid plastic that is slightly bendy. However, even with the bendable nature of the plastic itself, these headphones only fit his masked heads, rather, either the winky one or the standard one that he comes with by default. It does not fit his unmasked head because of the way that his hair is sculpted. And to me, that's kind of an oxymoron, because when he was wearing his headphones and listening to music, he was doing so when he was just Miles. He never had the headphones when he had the mask on, so it's a little bit peculiar that that's the only way that these things work. Or if you want to fit him on with his unmasked head, he would have to have him off via his neck, like resting on his neck or whatever to complete that illusion. Otherwise, you're SOL. Just like Spider-Ham is probably SOL out of his mallet. Yeah, so Sentinel decided to throw in the wooden mallet that Spider-Ham uses in the movie with Miles. Why? I don't know, but I guess what do you expect out of the company that decided to toss in Spider-Ham with Gwen? I mean, yeah, I get it. You know, they're part of the same team, but I feel like Ham had more scenes with nor Spider-Man or even Penny with the robot, but then again, your Penny and the robot are already bundled with each other. So I guess they didn't really want to allocate too much plastic and decided to toss his mallet in with Miles instead. And you could technically still pose him with the mallet on his holding hand, and you could do so by removing the handle from the actual hammer piece and kind of fitting it from underneath like so, and then just kind of pegging it into the mallet itself and fitting it in like that. But I still don't get why it's with Miles. I really wish that I was a fly in the wall for when this choice was made, because it's really, really curious to the way that Sentinel decided to package all of their characters together, whether it be accessories or characters overall, like Ham with Gwen. But there you have it, folks. Everything that is included with either the MAFEX or Sentinel versions of Into the Spider-Verse Miles Morales. And I really do hope that this comparison served as a way to guide you into what each company offers. If you were either looking into collecting characters from this specific movie or trilogy of movies. And it's a very peculiar case, because when it comes to Into the Spider-Verse, both MAFEX and Sentinel made figures, but Figuarts did not. However, Figuarts did manage to at least make a Miguel O'Hara, Gwen, and Miles for Across the Spider-Verse. It's really strange, and I don't know how the licensing of all that worked, but one thing is for certain, Sentinel completed the wave when it came to the official Spider band from Into the Spider-Verse. You got Peter B. Parker, you got Spider-Noir, you got Penny Parker along with the Spider-Bot, you have Spider-Ham and Gwen, and now you have Miles, which technically got reissued recently. He was technically the first release, but a lot of people missed out on him that they actually went and made a restock, whereas with MAFEX, you only got Gwen and Miles, and that's really about it. They didn't bother to finish the rest of the team. I don't know if maybe licenses expired and that's why they gave it on over to Figure Arts. I don't know how that worked. All right, I'm just speculating. But that's one major point that I want to give over to Sentinel, is that if you're dealing with this price point and this quality of prosumer collecting, I would actually have to say it's kind of a given to give it a Sentinel, even though MAFEX was able to do a number of different things a little better than that of Sentinel. To me, I feel like the final point across that gives Sentinel the win is the fact that they finished the wave and it's within scale. So if you're dealing with this kind of overall wave from this specific property and you really want to have the whole team together to kind of keep the inconsistencies out of place and not trigger anyone's OCD, stick with Sentinel. That way you can get the entire team and still be dealing with a quality product for the $100 to $120 range. I just hope that by completing the team, completing the wave of Into the Spider-Verse, Sentinel is able to keep afloat for a little while longer to hopefully kind of build upon the things that they did with that wave and produce better figures, better quality figures, maybe even go into the market of felt goods for alternate outfits and things like that. Meanwhile, I know that MAFEX is quite honestly safe. They have tackled Marvel, DC, literally everything else in between, the boys, other characters, other properties, you name it. And in turn, I feel pretty confident they're going to be around for a really long time, whereas Sentinel, I can't really speak for their impact on this current market of prosumer collecting. But what do you guys think? Is there enough going on with the Sentinel Into the Spider-Verse team, or rather wave of figures, that convinces you that Sentinel could be a viable competitor within this market to give MAFEX and Figure Arts a little bit of run for their monies? Or is it because of that uncertainty within the company of Sentinel that makes you go, yeah, I'm just going to stick with MAFEX because they're kind of consistent, tried and true. Even though they didn't finish the Into the Spider-Verse wave, they're still dealing with a lot of comic accurate Spideys, X-Men, Marvel, DC, all those other characters, and I know exactly where my money is going and what I'm getting in return. Whichever camp you fall on, I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say down below. And while you're down there, hit the thumbs up button if you liked the video, hit the thumbs down if you did not. And as always, guys, stay humble. I'll catch you guys later.